Hello everybody, welcome to the channel, and this video here is my review on the My Little Pony movie for Generation 4, aptly called My Little Pony, the movie. Yeah, great title. This film was released to tie in both Season 7 and Season 8 to each other, so naturally I should probably review this movie after I finish the Season 7 video, but if we're being real, there really is nothing in this movie that references Season 7 at all, and if you were to watch this right after To Where and Back Again, you would genuinely miss absolutely nothing jumping into Season 7. I'm also choosing to review the movie before watching Season 7 again because lately I got a new job, and a lot of my former spare time is going to that. But rest assured, when I find the time to, I will review Season 7, it will come out, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. But back on topic for the film, to give some background. I first watched this movie not in theaters, but at home with my mom, which was all sorts of awkward. But I also recall not being the most enthusiastic over the movie either. I just thought it was kinda weak, really. But just talking about the past ain't gonna really help us as far as understanding this movie, what it does right, what it does wrong, and you know, all that jazz. So for now, let's talk about how I'm going to review this movie. Since compared to individual episodes of the main show, this is going to be a lot longer. I'm going to talk about this movie in 3 different acts. Act 1 is basically everything between the beginning and the villains chasing the main 6 as they go on their journey. Act 2 is the journey itself, and Act 3 is basically everything after Twilight gets captured. And yeah, if you couldn't already tell, there will be spoilers. With this all said and done though, let's now get into the actual review. My Little Pony the movie. Twilight and her friends must venture outside of Equestria to find help when an invading villain seeks her magic. Before talking about the story, the characterization, the music, or any of that stuff, I really want to talk about the animation. Now, what's so notable about it is that this movie is animated in 2D. In case you don't know, 2D movies are all but extinct in animation nowadays, so it's a very real rarity to see movies animated in this style. And it honestly looks really good. And it really goes to show that there's nothing wrong with having 2D animated movies, which is why it's also a real shame that they've really fallen out of favor lately. Even back in 2017, this was actually really rare, and I really appreciate getting to see this style of animation again. It's often more looked down on by others because 2D animated movies are more associated with being for children, while 3D and live action films are more often associated with being grown up. And it's a real shame because 2D animation can look absolutely beautiful. Just look at video games like Cuphead and Pizza Tower. As a result, even in 2023, the animation honestly feels pretty timeless. Now, it's not perfectly animated. There are some weird shots, like for example, this one with Rainbow Dash. Her head looks kind of alien if you ask me. But as a whole, the movie looks great, especially in the first act. Future acts, not so much because the color gets toned down a lot, but that's for later. My praise for the animation style aside though, I would still say that the movie's quality is eclipsed by the main cartoon. It just feels like though there are some expressive moments in the film, Friendship is Magic in general has always had some very expressive animation, especially in the later seasons where it feels very cartoony and it's honestly a lot more fun to watch. And even beyond the more cartoony elements of the later seasons, you also have episodes like The Perfect Pair, which just have absolutely beautiful animation all around. So yeah, for the most part the film looks good, but it really could look better, I think. So it's in Act 1 we hear about something called the Festival of Friendship, which Twilight is hosting. It's honestly pretty typical fare for My Little Pony, like lots of episodes start off like this. And the universe is treated like a really big deal, with all sorts of ponies coming from all over Equestria. Though how this is gotten across to the audience kinda baffles me. Before Twilight asked the princesses for a favor, a couple of random mayors mentioned how ponies all over Equestria are coming for this festival, and this dialogue ends up being pretty much entirely pointless because Cadance says the exact same thing. Except with Cadance, we're also introduced to a new character that will be shown in the movie and who also sings the ending song, Songbird Serenade. In all honesty, this isn't really that big of a deal, but this movie has only so much runtime, and I'd rather see it actually be used to establish more things that are not immediately obvious to us yet. Like later we see the main 6 preparing stuff for the festival, why not just see that in the beginning instead? And as that's going on and all the antics are playing out, give us some visual storytelling, like showing us all the other ponies that have arrived from all sorts of walks of life. It's ultimately a really minor complaint, it may not even really matter to you, but it is something on my mind. There's a few jokes which I am not the most fond of, like the Hungry Hungry Hippos one, or a lot of the Hasbro references. But then other ones like Songbird Serenade's Bodyguards I found just to be really funny. I don't know what they're a reference to, but I can't help but feel like they are one, and I just know whatever it is, I probably really have to check it out myself later on in life. The siege on Canterlot was also really fun to watch, though an observation I could not help but make was just wondering where the security was in Canterlot. Like, where are the royal guards? Why are the Wonderbolts back to being useless again? Really, the only ponies that try to put up any real fight are Princess Cadance and Princess Luna. And surprise, surprise, they're not that good at combat. But to their credit, at least they tried. Celestia just stayed there completely still like it was Rarity falling to her death in Sonic Rainboom. And for some reason, seeing Cadance be the first to fall just made Shining Armor's absence be a lot more noticeable. Like, really, Cadance, where's your husband? Why is he not here to protect you? And Celestia tells Luna to head south to go to the hippos, and she gets cut off by one of those obsidian bombs again. And spoiler alert, what she meant was the hippogriffs, which are basically a hybrid of eagles and ponies. Why the hippogriffs specifically? I honestly cannot give an answer to that. I mean, by now in the series, you have access to changelings, you have yaks, you have dragons, you have freaking Discord, but you want to go to the farthest away allies you could possibly think of, who we learned later had to flee from the Storm King. And according to the princess, they fled a while ago, so how does Celestia not know this? Maybe it's possible the Storm King invaded only recently? But that wording, a while ago, is just so vague. Is it a short while? Is it a long while? I don't know, and I don't think anyone knows, really. But it must be a short while ago, because otherwise, I have absolutely no idea how Celestia could make such a big mistake. Heck, if this movie's supposed to take place between season 7 and 8, what about the Elements of Harmony? Those still exist, and at that point, why did the Pillars of Equestria, Star Swirls, Sunambula, Rockhoof, Mage Meadowbrook, Miss Main, Flash Magnus, bring them all back out of retirement, have them help you fight the Storm King and his army! And already you probably noticed one of the biggest problems with this film. It's extremely contrived. Again, generally pretty par for the course for My Little Pony episodes, especially the two-parters, like Twilight having a brother we never heard about before at Canterlot Wedding. But at least those contrivances didn't lead to big gaping plot holes in the film's story. In fact, they're so big that I'm honestly subscribed to the idea that this movie was actually written during a period of time that was also for a previous season of the show. Because if I'm being real, a lot of this movie really feels like it has continuity kept from season 4 at the absolute latest. And it really shows with the characterization of these characters, especially Fluttershy. Who might I also add, and this is coming from someone whose favorite pony is Fluttershy, I think she's the second most useless character in the entire film. Like, not only does she do absolutely nothing to help further the plot along, unlike Rarity, Pinkie Pie, and Rainbow Dash, but a lot of her moments are just her cowering in fear like she's terrified of everything that comes across her. Which is a really heavy whiplash after seeing season 7 and seeing how much more she grew as a character. Maybe audiences would be really confused seeing a really bold character named Fluttershy, but as someone who's watched season 7 of this show, it's extremely off-putting. And the only reason she's not the absolute most useless character in the film is because Grubber exists. But trust me, we will have plenty of time to talk about him later in the film. The other characters do fare better, Pinkie Pie a little bit more, but talking about her now, I found her mostly obnoxious throughout the entire movie. Except for surprisingly the third act, as well as near the end of the second one. That much all being said, the rest of the main 6 were pretty alright, Spike included. Though back to the story for a bit, let me just also throw this out there, but I really enjoyed watching Tempest's Shadow do her thing. Really, whenever she appears in a scene, you know you're gonna be in for a good time. The delivery on her lines is super sharp, and I think that she does a great job at being intimidating. Her design is also really neat. You see she's a unicorn with a horn that's actually broken off of her head. And that gets touched on more in the third act. But in case you really want to know, I personally don't have any real problems with Tempest as a character. Well, no, that's not entirely true. I do have one problem, and that's how her whole philosophy is that you can't trust anybody. But she's putting her faith in the Storm King to restore her horns, so kinda hypocritical, don't you think? Speaking of Tempest's horn though, she's tasked by the Storm King to capture the 4 rulers of Equestria, so that the Storm King can harness their magic using that staff and be able to really actually make storms. So, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm a little uncomfortable to bring this up, but if they need alicorn magic, there are 5 alicorns, and she presumably needs only 4, so why not just get Flurry Heart? I know that's a pretty freaking dark thing to mention, that you could just abduct the baby and use that to power up the Storm King's scepter to make himself be able to conjure storms. But when the film says that the Storm King needs to capture the 4 rulers of Equestria, clearly he meant he was to capture princesses, so just take the baby, leave Twilight alone, and you'll basically rule the whole freaking world. And it's bound to be public knowledge that 5 alicorns exist, so the absence of Flurry Heart is actually a little distracting given all of that. And actually, to be completely honest, I don't know why he needs specifically alicorn magic either. If he wants to create storms, then shouldn't he only need Pegasi magic? I mean, it is true that it makes more sense to focus your efforts on just capturing 1 alicorn rather than thousands of Pegasi, but the beginning of the film established that basically every pony in Equestria would be here for Twilight's Friendship Festival.
Wow, every pony from Manhattan to Saddle Arabia is here. I know, Philly. We almost couldn't book a stable.
And it's strongly implied that every pony that's not of the main 6 was already captured by the Storm King's army. You can't convince me that there aren't enough Pegasi to power up that scepter that the Storm King has. And I highly doubt that missing Fluttershy and Rainbow Dash will really make that much of a difference either. There's also just a matter of creating storms being a really lame superpower in a world where Pegasi literally control the weather. And given the villains that existed in My Little Pony before already, this is honestly a massive step down from episodes like A Canterlot Wedding, Twilight's Kingdom, or heck, even the Cutie map. I also want to talk about the music for a bit, but as you can tell, there's a lot of songs in this movie. In fact, I think you can call it a musical. And if I'll be straight with you all, the music is generally not very impressive. At least not in the first act. There are some pretty good songs in the second and third act if you asked me, but the first act is nothing I'm really interested in. The first song is basically just the Go-Go's We Got the Beat with some ponies mixed into it, and the second song, We Got This Together, just feels like a rather generic pop song, and as a result, it fails to keep my interest at all. Look, I don't want to be too harsh, because there are some moments which I think sound pretty nice, like when Twilight's flying by herself over the water, but it's no This Day aria, that's for dang sure. As a whole, the first act of the movie is not very good. Definitely suitable for a generic kids movie, but for My Little Pony Friendship is Magic at season 7 and onward, it leaves a lot to be desired. The best I could really say for it so far is that I found it rather entertaining all the same, especially the first couple of times I was watching this movie. Definitely at least more fond of it than the very first time I ever saw it with my mom. But Acts 2 and 3 have to do a lot of heavy lifting to lift Act 1 out of the pits. So Act 2, let's see how that fares now. Well, as from here on out, we see the main 6 finally beginning their journey, and we see them in a desert, where we get some gags showing them suffering from the heat and sand. It may just be me, but I don't really enjoy this scene, and it's mostly because we don't really get to see much of them actually going anywhere. I mean, we can assume they're far away from Equestria, but I would have appreciated some more visual detail, like seeing just how far they've actually traveled. Like, say, a map showing their journey from Canterlot to wherever they are. Or maybe a short little montage, just seeing them travel from locale to locale. Barring that, the way the main 6 and Spike find there's a new town coming out because of a role they find in the desert seems rather peculiar. You can have Rainbow Dash scout by flying up to see if there's a town up ahead. And they just can't help but think, but this seems like an opportunity for a song to play out. You know the old saying, cheerful company shortens the miles, right? Either way you slice it, these gags to me just were not very enjoyable. Regardless, shortly afterwards we reach Cluj Town, and we see the main 6 interact with the locals here. Something I have to give this movie credit for is just how unappealing it makes outside of Equestria feel and look like. Now that may sound like a strange compliment, but to me, it just really sells how over the course of the movie, Twilight gets more and more jaded by the world around her. Now I do think the film may have went a little too far with Twilight getting more and more jaded by the world outside of Equestria, but it definitely leads to better foreshadowing later in the film as well. And something else about Cluj Town is that it seems to reek literally anything but generosity. Which would also explain really well why rarity was so important to the story. Everyone just has this me-first mentality where they don't want anyone helping them, because no one can trust one another. People are rowdy, people steal, and people generally have really bad manners here. It's also just really funny seeing how even the film is self-aware just how the colorful ponies contrast so greatly with the generally really brown and kind of diarrhea-ish looking town. Though on a side note, while I understand why a lot of this movie is actually pretty muted in color, I don't enjoy the fact that it looks so muted. And that's unfortunate. I love the animation style, but I don't like the coloration of most of the film. I get why it's done. It's to contrast the colorful ponies with basically everywhere around them, which is good for storytelling and atmosphere, but it's just not aesthetically pleasing if you catch my drift. And it's not just here either. We also see it on the upcoming airship as well as Mount Ares, so get used to this coloration scheme. At the very least, back in Klugetown, we also meet Capper, and he's probably my favorite character in the movie. That is, my favorite new character. He's a con artist that tries to win over the main six trust by helping them out of a jam with all the people crowding around them after Pinkie Pie basically made them impossible to ignore. And he has this great line about Pastella's coloritis, which he actually uses to get everyone to run away from the main six. Though he also makes everyone think that, I guess, parts of their body will fall off, and there's actually a dick joke as a result of that in this movie. Yeah, fun fact, this movie's rated PG, and there's your 4th fun fact for this video. I was kinda shocked to see this because I always thought the series had more dignity than that. Obviously I'm aware that there always has been some adult humor in the show, even back with season 1 like Transform of the Century and Always What That Ends Well. But even for this show, that feels pretty lowbrow. Especially from Capper, because Capper seems to be a lot more, well, for lack of a better word, slick. Though on the note of Capper, it's just really fun watching him in this movie. Even ignoring his song for a bit, he's shown to be very charismatic. And he also undergoes some actual character development in the movie too. Though this is mostly thanks to Rarity, who because he helped them when no one else would, she actually fixes up his jacket. And so when Tempest and the Storm King's Luckies catch up to the main six, Capper actually throws Tempest off course at his own peril, which to me is just a great reference to Rarity Takes Manhattan, as it shows by showing generosity to others can motivate others to do the same for you. And though the main six don't know it yet, it also kind of ties into Pinkie Pie's song later when she meets the Hippogriffs for the first time. Though speaking of songs, let me just throw this out there. Capper's song, I'm the Friend You Need, best song of the film, hands down. Even ignoring both the instrumentation and the lyrics, which are both good by the way, this song does a lot of heavy lifting narratively too. By playing into the dangers that the main six are at least aware of in Klugetown, and showing that Capper is someone that they can actually rely on. All the while sharing with us, the audience, that he is in fact going to betray them later down in life anyway. It really is to be expected as well, because really, no one really is out here to try and help others in Klugetown. They're all in it for themselves. Which already helps does not feel very forced at all. Now, I do feel the main six may have been a little too gullible and trusting of Capper, especially Rainbow Dash and Applejack, but I can forgive it because at least Twilight has her guard up here. As far as the scenes involving Tempest goes, let's just say that once again she is very cool, but she's held back really hard, not narratively, but just for entertainment's sake, she's held back a lot by Grubber. Grubber's entire purpose in this film is just to say what we literally can just see for ourselves on the screen. To help illustrate, remember back to Rainbow Falls when Soren clipped his wing and Fluttershy ended up commenting exactly what she just saw Rainbow Dash do to save him? Imagine that, but throw up almost the entire freaking film whenever Tempest does anything of substance. Not only is this annoying, but it breaks up a lot of tension that could be building up as we just see scenes unfold. And this is the biggest reason why I think he's a worse character than Fluttershy in this film. Because Fluttershy, as useless as she was, at least never actually held anyone else back. All Grubber does is make the film worse. I wouldn't mind so much, except for the fact that Grubber doesn't do anything in the film outside of maybe one thing in Act 3. And it's honestly so insignificant, it may as well not even really matter. Also, just throwing this out there, but I cannot help but think that Pinkie Pie has some kind of death wish or something. I guess it's not really like Pinkie Pie to be able to process what danger is, which surprisingly is in character for her. But it gets to the point where she's just downright reckless. And oftentimes, she can't make up for her own blunders either. Twilight or other ponies have to pick up the slack for her instead. Now, useless characters are bad, but when a character is actively making things worse for her friends, That's particularly especially bad in my opinion to watch. The only good thing I can say about it is that it makes it easier to sympathize with Twilight. But if it's at the expense of making Pinkie Pie this unaware of what's around her, I don't think it's worth it. Seriously y'all, Pinkie Pie may be crazy, but she's not stupid. Anyways, after their little adventure through Kludge Town, the main six find themselves aboard an airship. An airship being led by former pirates who are now working for the Storm King. Which just begs the question how our intrepid adventurers and Fluttershy will break them free from their fear of the Storm King so they can be awesome again. And it really just boils down to a song which apparently works. Not surprised, just disappointed. I mean, the main six could have made a pact with the pirates to maybe help them destroy the Storm King for good. But no, just think about how awesome they used to be, make them change their mind that way, and then I guess completely forget about the fact that they're going to be in really big trouble. It's a really stupid part of the second act, and it's only made worse when Rainbow Dash has a Sonic Rainboom forgetting about the fact that they're on the lam. You know, Rainbow Dash can be reckless, but her recklessness really doesn't work if it's actively harming others. So like Pinkie Pie, she just feels like a total freaking brainlet. The song itself isn't even that good, it's probably the worst so far in the film. It doesn't have the narrative power of I'm the Friend You Need, nor does it have the oomph of a future song or the animation of yet another future song in this film. It just serves to rally morale, despite not really accomplishing anything else that would actually make it justifiable that they would get their morale back. This next part may sound like projecting, but just imagine all the possible motives the pirates could have to actually serve the Storm King as is. They could be under surveillance, they could have friends or family be held hostage, heck, they could secretly be planning to betray the Storm King but just not be able to actually dethrone him. Whatever it is, the main six would be able to help them out of their funk. And as a result, win the pirates' loyalty, with the pirates more justifiably being willing to fight against the Storm King and his army. It just feels like there's so much potential that was not tapped into, and there's so much nuance lost. All the while heavily dumbing down Rainbow Dash as a character. That being said, this moment isn't entirely bad either. Because it is believable that Rainbow Dash would just get carried away when she's really in the heat of the moment. And if there's anything she loves to do, it's motivate people. But still, there's gotta be a better way to let the villains know where the main six actually are that don't delve into making the main six look stupid. Give us smarter villains, not dumber heroes. I want more moments of like Tempest forcing Capper to come along with her on her airship just in case he was lying. Now granted, after Twilight and her friend's cover is blown, Twilight gets a really cool moment to shine when she and her friends jump off the airship and she fetches a hot air balloon off of what she found on the ship using Spike's fire to get them to fly up. That was honestly pretty awesome. And it really sells that Twilight is now fully dependent on her own abilities and thinking to get themselves out of danger. Also, it's here that Tempest destroys the pirate's ship with Capper on it. Remember that for later. It's not really important to the story, but it is a plot hole I want to talk about. Anyway, finally the main six make it to Mount Ares, and they finally get to meet the hippogriffs at long last. And once again, it looks very gray and brown and, well, dreary. Some shenanigans lead them underwater, and as they're drowning, they're rescued by this hippogriff who is the princess of them all. Her name is Princess Skystar. And she takes the main six to her mother, who, might I also add, has guards on standby, but they don't do anything until she actively says for the guards who actually go after them. I'm sorry, isn't this an isolated civilization? Why would the guards have to wait for you to say anything? If they're already watching the entrance, and they can see when ponies are actually coming through, why would they not immediately be able to recognize that they're foreign invaders? I promise you I'm going somewhere with this. Because after some convincing from her daughter, Queen Novo, you know, the queen of the hippogriffs, she brings the pearl out and uses it to turn the main six into sea ponies and Spike into a blowfish. To the sea pony design's credit, they do look really cool, though it's also a shame that they get almost no screen time at all as sea ponies in the film. Particularly because some advertising art for the film portray the main six as sea ponies and Spike as a blowfish. It's not the movie's fault, but like, why advertise something that's barely in the movie at all? I say this, and then I remember, Hasbro was the one behind this film. In the words of Little Shy If I Am, buy our toys. Anyways, after seeing this pearl, Twilight says that they could use that pearl to basically turn everyone in Equestria or Cangela back at home into creatures that can actually stand up against the Storm King and his army. Now, that would be a neat idea, like having a whole team of Ursa Majors or cockatrices, but the Queen ain't having it. And you know something? It really is a shame that what Twilight is theorizing, we never actually get a chance to see be done. But that's not because Queen Novo ain't giving up her pearl. Let me just remind you of something. Remember Season 4 and the episode It Ain't Easy Being Breezy's? In that episode, there was a spell that Twilight was able to use that allowed her to copy the DNA of whatever creature she saw and actually implant it on her friends. She used this spell to help the Breezes get back home in time when Fluttershy refused to let them actually go. So if Twilight can do that there, why not use it again in the film? She's already thinking about it, but why would you not do it again, knowing just how much is actually at stake right now? The princesses have been transmutated into obsidian. All your friends back at home, including Starlight Glimmer, are being locked away in cages. And your road home, because remember, Twilight got her start in Canterlot, is being destroyed as you speak. Why not set aside your ethics for one movie and do something that you already are planning on doing, which you can do yourself, and save everyone all the more trouble? Listen, I understand that a film that takes place in a world like Equestria, where you have basically all the magic spells you can ever think of, would mean the characters have to be either extremely stupid, or extremely heavily nerfed to have any sort of tension in the story at all. But if you want the Hippogriff's Pearl to remain a plot device, maybe have Twilight theorize something that she can't already do with her own magic. Like maybe restoring feeling to the princesses that are now obsidian, or maybe some technobabble that allows you to counter the Storm King's defenses. But wanting the pearl for something that Twilight can already do is stupid. And more than that, but after Twilight is told no, Queen Novo is not going to help you get back your home, she resorts to trying to steal the pearl from behind her back and using her friends to basically distract her and the other hippogriffs. Now, I could of course question the ethics of Twilight to try and steal something from someone that's supposed to be an ally of Celestia, but there's a more pressing issue. Where are the freaking guards? When Princess Skystar escorts the main six and Spike to Queen Novo, you can very clearly see guards patrolling the entrance to Queen Novo's throne room. And keep in mind, these guards were never dismissed. They're missing from the shot, but they were never actually told to go anywhere else. So this forces me to ask either A, why did the guards go somewhere else? Or B, why were the guards standing there just watching Twilight try to steal this pearl and not do anything to stop her from doing it? Twilight's plan genuinely makes negative sense in context of the story. And it's especially baffling because we don't have guards in Canterlot, forget all of them, forget Shining Armor too. But we have guards here and they're clearly an afterthought. Before too long, I'm gonna need both hands to count all the plot holes in this film. By the way, Pinky's song One Small Thing is actually really catchy. It's bouncy, cheerful, really well animated, and really sells well Pinkie Pie's personality. It's also here I just really appreciate the sea ponies' designs. Like how their back fin actually resembles their manes as ponies, and you can even see their cutie mark there. But yeah, the main five do this huge musical number, and it was actually going to work, but then they find out that Twilight lied to them, and instead of trying to show them a good time, she just wanted them to distract Queen Novo and her daughter, which sadly enough cost them the one chance of getting the hippogriffs on their side that they had. And it's here we reach the Act 2 breakup, which is so typical of so many kids movies it seems. Where Pinkie Pie grills Twilight about not trusting her friends, and Twilight basically tells Pinkie Pie that she feels she'd be better off without friends like Pinkie Pie. And the remaining main four just look completely shocked and disgusted at Twilight for what she said, and Pinkie Pie looks legitimately really hurt. I've seen mixed opinions on this. I've seen some people that think that Twilight was completely in the wrong that basically lashed out the way she did. But some of those same people also think that Twilight was in the wrong and no second Prances, so I don't care what they think. Yet there are others that can both sympathize and even agree with Twilight for how she lashed out here. And really, I see both sides of this. Like I said when the main six first arrive in Cluj Town, a lot of the second act is just showing how Twilight's becoming more and more independent and leaning on her own abilities rather than others for help. You can see Twilight be more and more jaded as time goes on, and at some point, it becomes kind of hard to miss. It helps also because she's actually right about the fact that Rainbow Dash and Pinkie Pie have been doing some really stupid stuff throughout the entire adventure, which really can only stress out Twilight more. Particularly because, as a reminder, she's the target, and it can be difficult to accept being wrong when you've been right throughout the entire movie and this is the one time you screwed up. On the other hand, Pinkie Pie and the rest of the main five can claim to be betrayed by Twilight when she lied to them about trying to show the hippogriffs a good time. And it's easy to also see why this would bother Pinkie Pie so much to see that one of her friends does not trust her. I will say that Twilight was acting with more conventional wisdom, But that's still no excuse to lie to your friends all the same. Really, they're both at fault. Which in my opinion is a good thing, because it basically means that no matter which side you want to look at, an argument can be made that this is a reasonable way they would react. And just in case you want to mention they canceled that wedding, another episode where Twilight was right the entire time, Queen Chrysalis managed to gaslight Twilight into thinking she was wrong too, up until revealing herself that she's actually an imposter. Twilight, for good reason, never thought she was wrong in the film because she saw it as a means of where the ends justify the means. And the Knight Shiny Armor, who reasonably would be under a lot of pressure too, where Twilight does not need to give him even more to worry about, Pinkie Pie, quite possibly the absolute least self-aware pony, who's also less vital to the plot, is trying to tell Twilight what's what. Yeah, I'd be pretty mad at her too. And even barring that, it's entirely normal for people to lash out in the heat of anger. Especially when provoked enough. We've seen this in episodes like Party of One, Putting Your Hoof Down, Parental Guidance. All bottled up, Luna Eclipsed. Like, stop treating moments like this as if they're out of character for the people that are actually angry. Maybe sometimes you just have to eat a Snickers. In conclusion, is this a tired cliche? Yes, absolutely. But was it executed badly in the film? I would honestly say no. Cliches exist for a reason. It's because they work. So long as it makes sense within the context of the film, I honestly had no problem with it. So looking at Act 2 as a whole, I would honestly say that it's pretty messy. There's a lot of plot holes, and Grubber is just a completely worthless character that only makes the film worse. The songs in general do get better though. Capper is a good character to see in the film. And it is good to see Rarity, Rainbow Dash, and Pinkie Pie be actively involved in the story now. It also does a suitable job establishing Twilight and her growing lack of trust in her friends. Unfortunately, if there was any stability in the story, it completely fell apart when the main six were done with the hippogriffs. I can count like 5 plot holes that are present in the movie already by now. And unfortunately, not all those plot holes depend on actually seeing the show too. But there's still one more act, so let's see how the movie does as it tries to close itself out. So after Twilight and her friends separate, Twilight is just left to mope around by herself. And subsequently, she is captured by Tempest. Which actually leads to the next song, which is Open Up Your Eyes. This song I actually mentioned earlier having a lot of oomph to it. It's the villain song, and it's about every bit as dramatic as I thought it would be. A neat detail I really want to bring out is that during Tempest's song, when she first says open up your eyes, you see her shadow, and you can actually see her horn in the shadow. This to me accomplishes 2 things. One, it shows that she lost her horn at some point, instead of being born with a defect like say Scootaloo. And 2, it sets up later to actually show how she lost her horn in the first place. Basically, a nurse or miner knocked it off of her head, leading to her magic becoming unstable and her former friends shunning her. Which may not sound like much, but compared to other villains like Starlight Glimmer, I think this backstory does do enough to make her motivations more understandable. A unicorn losing their horn is to me like a human losing an arm, a leg, or heaven forbid their tongue. You will be worse for wear as a result of this deformity, and adapting to life with it will prove to be difficult. As a result, it does make sense to me that Tempest would be absolutely desperate to get her horn back. That being said, what doesn't make sense to me is how she seems to completely trust that the Storm King will actually honor his word. And that's not just because I saw Twilight's Kingdom already. But Tempest's whole character up to this point talks about how she refuses to trust anyone else, because the ponies that were closest to her abandoned her when times got tough. And yet, she trusts the Storm King, a villain who is also a complete and utter tyrant. Like, you'd almost expect that she'd have a contingency plan in case he didn't want to honor his word, but no. Which feels strangely out of character for her. Back to the song though, barring the oomph it naturally has being the villain song, it's kinda just alright. I like some of the visuals, but the lyrics aren't really that impressive. And like, I've heard more menacing songs from a Herf Swarming Tale. After this scene though, we be back up with the main six and Spike, who are all now fully aware that Twilight has been captured. And the pals here to help them are Capper, the pirates, and Princess Skystar. Which begs the question as far as how they all managed to catch up. Because when Tempest destroyed the pirate's ship, with Capper still on it mind you, it sunk into the ocean. They even say as much in this scene. Not to mention that Capper's a cat. Don't cats hate water? And it's never shown how Capper or the pirates managed to catch up. What, did Tempest just let Kappa and the pirates tag along on her airship? Or can the pirates still fly despite the extra drag their clothes would provide to them? I don't want to call this a plot hole specifically because the pirates are birds, so naturally they can fly. But why would Tempest even let them go? In her own words, they betrayed her. You'd think then that either she'd kill them right there and then on her ship, or imprison them to be dealt with later. Yeah, I'm sorry, but that's already the 6th plot hole in the film. Though it is pretty funny that even Spike can see how contrived this setup really is. We soon see Canterlot again, and it is in ruin. Just about every pony is captured, including Songbird's Serenade. And it is now time for Twilight and the other 3 princesses' magic to be taken by the Storm King. Which leads to a pretty funny scene in my opinion, just seeing the Storm King goof off with the princess's magic. And it just goes to really show that the Storm King is a really goofy and kind of funny villain. I love his little jig when he has the day and night cycle just going back and forth while singing about sunrise and sunset. It's so dumb and juvenile, but it's just so funny to me all the same. Oh, by the way, he's questioning why Twilight is not obsidian yet, and later on goes on to break her out of her cage. No good reason for it, just showing that the Storm King is also an idiot. At this point, what else can I really expect? The remaining main 5 and Spike make their way back to Canterlot alongside their new friends, and they're using a Trojan cake. A pretty neat disguise, and a pretty subtle callback to the Hooffields and the McCults, I think. Then again, I could be wrong, but I really want Fluttershy to have a purpose in this film. And that was an episode that she and Twilight starred in, so no one else would really have that idea. Unless it was, of course, Capper. That makes plenty of sense. And sure enough, thanks to Capper's smooth talking, the main 5, Spike, Princess Skystar, and the pirates are able to infiltrate alongside Capper himself. Look at you playing the crowd like you're Trixie. But as they make their way to the Storm King to actually take the fight to him, we see Grubber's one and only real impact on the story, reaching for the Trojan cake and then realizing that there were actually people in the cake that were going to try and invade. Yeah, that's literally all the impact he has on the plot, at least for stuff that reasonably only he could do. Then there's the all-out brawl, which has some pretty fun moments in my opinion. My favorite just has to do with Pinkie Pie and the surprise and double surprise she uses against one of the Storm King's guards. That genuinely made me laugh pretty dang hard. Also, Princess Skystar must have some serious games if she can lift a Stormtrooper all by herself. Wait, Stormtrooper. Guys, I just realized something. Is My Little Pony the movie a reference to Star Wars? I never watched any Star Wars movies, but if y'all have and you know if there's a reference to Star Wars, let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear about it. There are other moments, but I don't think they're really as notable. But I'm sure some will find pleasure in seeing Fluttershy basically make a Stormtrooper open their heart out to her. Meanwhile, I get so much satisfaction seeing Capper use Spike as a flamethrower and just mowing down Stormtroopers with his fire breath. That was just so funny, especially seeing some Stormtroopers entirely engulfed in flames. But back to the plot. Shortly after this, Tempest is finally fully aware that she was used the entire time by the Storm King, and sure enough was not going to get her horn back. And I ran on this, but I already did, so no point in repeating myself. Anyways, after a short scuffle with the Storm King, she nearly gets sucked into the storm, but Twilight saved her just in the nick of time. Because that's what friends do for each other. And more importantly, just because someone treated you horribly doesn't mean that you should always treat them horribly too. And this would resonate a lot with Tempest, because for once, when she truly needed help from others, she finally got it. And it wasn't from a friend or an ally, it was from an enemy. Before now, Tempest was under absolutely zero obligation to help Twilight or her friends at all, but this one act of kindness is all you really need for her to be able to see that she's been working for the wrong side the entire time. And the main 5 then show up just as the Storm King's about to zap both Tempest and Twilight, leaving them with just one more thing to do, and that's steal the scepter from the Storm King. So, I'll give the writers some credit. We know by now that Twilight does not have her magic anymore, and the winds are extremely strong, so neither Fluttershy or Rainbow Dash can really fly up and grab it. Unfortunately, there's still a plot hole on this part because Rarity is a unicorn and she still has her magic, so you could have had her be at the end of the chain and have her levitate the staff down instead. Instead, they have Twilight risk her life trying to grab the scepter, and, well, she does succeed. It just seems like there was a smarter way they could have done it. I get that it's the heat of the moment, and you can't always think things through when it's really tense, which does make this more justifiable than previous moments in the movie, but still, an inaccuracy is an inaccuracy. Oh yeah, and the Storm King dies. No, really, he does die. He tried to throw an obsidian bomb at the main six, but instead Tempest takes the bomb for them. The blast hits the Storm King too, and they both get turned to obsidian. But while Tempest was rescued by Twilight, the Storm King is left falling to his death and breaks into a billion little pieces. So hey, points for a villain actually dying in the film, less like King Sombra. With all said and done, Tempest is then restored to being a pony again, same with the other Obsidian princesses, and because magic, I guess all the damage done to Canterlot is just reversed. Okay then, how convenient. The Friendship Festival is able to start, Tempest is good now, and we close out on one last song, Rainbows. And is it me, or Songbird Serenade's accent just really, inconsistent? I can't tell what her accent was earlier in the film, but when she's actually singing here, it sounds almost German. I'm not world literate at all, so I can't really tell, but it just doesn't sound consistent with her accent earlier in the film. And the way she throws praise at Twilight and her friends for saving everybody also just feels rather inauthentic. It's not just me, right? It just feels like her heart really wasn't into it when she was saying Twilight and her friends. But that's about all that's left in the movie. Oh yeah, we also hear that Tempest Shadow's real name is actually Fizzlepop Berry Twist. No point in saying that, just figured you should know it. And that concludes Act 3. Once again, the writing does leave a lot to be desired, but ultimately, I had fun watching it still. There were some fun gags, I still like the villains, the songs weren't terrible, and there's even a decent moral about how you can't just let your friendships end after just one fight. There are still a lot of plot holes though, and I still really do not care for how dreary everything looks. Not to mention, getting to finally see the Storm King in all of his glory actually doing stuff just makes me wish we could see more of him throughout the entire film. But overall, as a third act, I think it's okay. Could definitely afford to be better though. So looking at the film as a whole, what do I think of it? Well, I'll tell you this much. If looking at this film through the lens of a normal episode of Friendship is Magic, it would be a nightmare episode! But to be nice, I'm not going to do that. Because if I did, then all the plot holes I found in this movie would be downright inexcusable. And it's very possible that the script for this movie could have been written like long before Season 7. Not to mention, anything that was established after Season 4 is purely in the background and does not affect the plot at all. So to be nice, I'll look at this film as if it came out after Season 4. It can't be any earlier than that because after Season 3 is when Twilight became a princess. But throughout Season 4, we don't know she's the Princess of Friendship until the very end. Meanwhile, this film takes place in Canterlot, so we can't see Twilight's castle. And we don't see other dragons, yaks, or changelings either. So as far as this movie's plot, they may as well not even exist. Now, looking at this film as a standalone entity instead, the plot is a little easier to swallow. There are still some pleasant songs. The animation is still great, and the characterization for the most part is still okay. But unfortunately, some big plot holes still exist in the film. The lack of royal guards in the first act, and the random disappearance of royal guards in the second act are still problems. And surrounding the third act, it still makes absolutely zero sense how Capper and the pirates managed to catch up to the main five and Spike. A lot of the songs also just were not memorable in my opinion. There were some good ones, as well as other songs that just have better animation or provide necessary context to certain characters, but more than half the soundtrack in this movie just does not impress me at all. In spite of this, I would have called this movie okay, if not for some of the characters and how they were handled. I'm not gonna act like Grubber completely ruined this movie for me, but he did a lot of damage when Tempest was on screen. And not the kind of damage that furthers the plot, I mean damage that just makes the movie actively worse when you first watch it and on rewatch. I have no idea why he was written to be in this movie at all, because he's not necessary to anything at all. And really, isn't it kind of hypocritical that Tempest would even have him around? Because throughout the entire film, she's portrayed as someone that's entirely independent, aside from maybe the stormtroopers. What does Grubber actually contribute to Tempest? I can't understand at all why he had to be in the film at all, and he sours so much of what I could have found redeeming about this movie as well. The pacing also just feels oddly slow in the film. There are quite a few parts that don't really add anything to the story at all, and aren't even really entertaining. Like the very beginning of the film, or the main six suffering through the desert, when more time could have been spent actually fleshing out the characters or the world around the main six. Like showing truly how far they've had to travel from Equestria, or at least more visual variety than just so much brown and gray in the world. And that's just it. I don't want to dislike this movie, I don't want to call it bad. But at the same time, if I don't call it what I think of it, I'd be lying to you, and to myself. So with a very heavy heart, I have to say it, I think My Little Pony the movie 2017 is in fact a nightmare movie. Perhaps in the future I'll check out the Equestria Girls movies instead, because I've heard those were actually better, especially Rainbow Rocks. But as for now, I would say that you can do so much better than this one, it's not even funny. It really hurts as well, though we've already gotten so many fantastical adventures throughout the original show. So there's really nothing unique to this movie that you can't already get from any two-parter. Return of Harmony, A Canterlot Wedding, Princess Twilight Sparkle, The Crystal Empire, Twilight's Kingdom, The Cutie Map, To Where and Back Again, the pilot Friendship is Magic, all I would say are better than this. Heck, maybe even the Cutie Remark, at least that film for all of its flaws was by no means boring. This film meanwhile feels like bizarrely uninspired. Like verbatim, you could have done this exact same story with literally any other IP and it would be largely unchanged. In fact, it would arguably be better because Friendship is Magic has a much higher bar of quality associated with it. Not to mention continuity, which really makes the story not work given it came out in Season 7. The end of Season 7, no less. Where a big, long, and epic adventure would ironically be redundant. I know lots of people will like this film all the same still, and by all means, I don't want to take that joy away from those other people. Because there is something truly special about getting to see your favorite cartoon characters on the big screen. Speaking for myself though, I'd want that big picture show to be actually good. And is it too much to ask for seeing our favorite characters on the big screen in a quality movie? Personally, I don't think it is too much to ask for. But who knows, maybe you disagree with me on that. Anyways, like I said at the beginning of this video, you likely already know this, but this movie is supposed to actually bridge Season 7 and Season 8. But the Season 7 video isn't actually out yet. So now is probably as good a time as ever to give an update as far as what's happening in my life right now. A couple of months ago I got a job, and that job is taking away a lot of my would-be free time as well as my would-be energy. It really took a lot out of me just to watch this movie twice and then be able to record all the commentary for my thoughts on the movie. So if my uploads feel slow, that would be the reason why. I have a life outside of the internet. There's also the fact that I play a lot of video games and I record that for my other channel, Phantom A. Which, to be blunt, is a channel I think deserves a lot more of my attention because both it makes more money than this channel does, and because I generally have more fun playing video games than watching My Little Pony nowadays anyway. You gotta remember, the best of this show is basically behind me now, so reviewing Friendship is Magic feels more like a chore than a hobby. This is also to say, please don't rush me in my community posts or my comment sections. I'm only one person living a life in half a dozen directions. And when Season 7 is done, well, I hope you think it's worth it. And if it is done, well, it'll be on the screen right now. Otherwise, why not check last season's review of Season 6? I think it came out pretty well, really. Anyways, this is Orangela signing out, and thank you for watching.